Hello, everyone. I'm Randy Arrington, and welcome to the 50th episode of Page Valley Living. We're here today in the offices of Bill Dudley and Associates Real Estate in Luray to talk about the highly discussed issue of housing in the Page Valley, especially here in the town of Luray, and more specifically, the issue of short-term rentals. We're going to be discussing that issue today here with longtime Luray Realtor Bill Dudley and Luray Councilman Alex White. I want to thank both of you gentlemen for being here today.
Sure, happy to be here.
With a wave of new applications coming forth from property owners wanting to operate lodging houses, the issue of short-term rentals has been discussed at numerous meetings at both the town and county level. So, how big of a problem is it? How is it impacting the local housing market? And how is the town of Luray planning to address it? We'll answer these questions and more and getting into the details in just a little bit. But first, here's a word from our sponsor. At Luray Caverns, from well-lighted paved walkways, explore cathedral-sized rooms with ceilings 10 stories high, and walk among huge chambers filled with towering stone columns. Come visit Geology's Hall of Fame, only at Luray Caverns. Visit them online at luraycaverns.com to plan your trip today. Episode 50 of Page Valley Livin' is being recorded on Monday, December the 16th, and will be airing on Wednesday, December the 18th. We'll be talking with longtime Luray Realtor Bill Dudley and Councilman Alex White from the Luray Council about the issue of short-term rentals and how they are impacting the local housing market, both positively and negatively. We'll take a look at all that and more when we come back, but first, let's take a look at this week's headlines. And now looking back at the week that was in the Page Valley. On Monday night, the Page County Board of Supervisors unanimously approved using $56,951 from the county's general fund to help fund the purchase of a body scanner to be used at the Page County Jail. The total cost of the body scanner is $162,000, with another $9,000 tacked on for an 8-year warranty. Sheriff Chad Cubbage has made numerous requests for a body scanner to curb the inflow of drugs into the jail. Drugs smuggled in through a body cavity led to the overdose of an inmate in recent years and subsequently civil lawsuits filed against the sheriff and the county. Supervisors seem to be more receptive to funding the project now after receiving more information about the devices and the fact that more than 2/3 of the cost is now being found within the sheriff's own budget to include things such as asset forfeiture funds, leftover capital improvement funds, and other sources in the sheriff's department budget. Also on Monday night, the Board of Supervisors went into closed session at the end of Monday's brief meeting to discuss a prospective industry looking to locate in the county and also to potentially interview or discuss the potential candidates for the vacancy in the District 4 seat. Among the applications announced publicly are former Supervisor Larry Foltz, Michael Painter, Susan Kyle, and Kendall Lee McAllister. A final decision is expected soon. In the world of sports, the Luray High School basketball team is off to a 3-1 start after defeating East Rockingham at home 66-52 last Thursday night. And then they traveled to Pendleton County, West Virginia on Saturday. They picked up another narrow win, 64-61. And the Bulldogs will travel to Stewart's Draft on Thursday night and will host Lancaster at 3:30 p.m. on Saturday, December the 21st. The Page County boys basketball team, they're off to a 4-1 start to the season with a 54-51 win over Waynesboro last Thursday. The Panthers travel to East Rockingham on Wednesday night and then host Madison County for both teams' Bull Run District opener at 7:30 p.m. Friday night. Page County wrestling team opened up their season Saturday in Harrisonburg at a wrestling invitational. The Panthers finished 7th overall among mostly 3A and 4A schools. With 3 medalists, Cameron Daniil came away with 3rd place, Michael Shiflett took 3rd place, and Jordan Hendrick took a tough loss in the championship match. He finished up runner-up in 2nd place in his division. And now looking at the weekend ahead in the Page Valley real quick, remember to shop small for the holidays in the Page Valley in the towns of Luray, Stanley, and Shenandoah. Many of those merchants and eateries will be offering holiday specials. And on Saturday, December the 21st, Glenn Shelton will be performing his Christmas show at 7:30 p.m. at the Rebecca J. Graves Regional Center for the Performing Arts in downtown Luray. There's also going to be live music out at Cooters in the Valley, just west of Luray, from 1 to 3 p.m. on Saturday, and bluegrass music 2 to 4 on Sunday. And that's the headlines from the past week in the Page Valley. And we're back now to talk with Bill Dudley and Alex White. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here with us to talk today.
Great. Happy to be here. Excited.
I think we got an issue that a lot of folks have some level of interest in. Before we begin, I do want to set the stage for the audience out there watching this video. We fully realize that this is kind of a controversial, kind of a hot button issue. We do not plan to solve that issue today. We don't plan to have all the answers, but we simply want to talk about some of the facts surrounding this issue. We want to talk with an industry expert about its impact and get a feel for how local government is going to respond and react specifically here in the town of Luray. Mr. Dudley does not speak for everyone in the real estate industry, nor does Mr. White speak for the Luray Council as a whole. But we simply want to share some thoughts, some ideas, some conversation that will hopefully broaden the public's knowledge on this topic. So with that said, as we begin, gentlemen, most folks locally here do know who you are, and but for those who don't, I want to give you 30 seconds to tell us who you are and what you do, and we're going to take beauty before youth. Mr. Dudley, you start.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm Bill Dudley. I'm a local real estate broker and also a certified appraiser. I've been in the business for about 35 years. We have a family-owned and operated real estate company here in town. My son's an associate broker with me. My oldest granddaughter is a certified appraiser with me, just like I am. I have an agent, Judy Bell, who's a longtime agent here in Luray and Page County. And then I have Marty Hendricks Perry, who works for us in the Harrisonburg market as far as appraisals are concerned. So we list property, we sell property, we do appraisals, and we're very thankful for this community and the support that we've gotten over the years.
That was very thorough. You left out one thing.
What's that?
You had a birthday today, I believe, didn't you?
Yes.
Happy birthday.
Yes,
Happy
right.
birthday.
Thank you.
All right, Councilman White, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you will.
Yeah, well, first, happy birthday to Mr. Dudley.
Thanks, Alex.
I'm Alex White. I serve on the Luray Town Council, and I would say, particularly relevant to this issue, I'm the only council member who has, rented where they live and is not a homeowner. So I feel a lot of these housing issues really acutely as somebody who is in the market. And when I was elected, I knocked on hundreds of doors, and this was an issue that was very much a recurring issue. And I've always taken philosophically that when something is on a lot of people's minds, we've got to address it and not say that we know any better than anybody. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, outstanding. Very well, very well. Well, I'm going to start out with a general question here, and I want each of you to respond. And I'll kind of bounce back and forth with who I start with on some of these. But the general question being, what do you think is the biggest impact, both positive and negative, that short-term rentals have had on the Luray market over the last 2 years? List for me one positive and one negative, and I'm going to start with Mr. Dudley.
Well, it's probably hard to pick the top one, and I've always been a proponent of people that own property having the ability to use their property as they want. But I think one of the biggest impacts is pretty simple. They're able to generate some more income, and that certainly does help them. To generate that income, they have to have a pretty appealing property. Right. So they continue to improve the property, maintain the property. So I think that would be one of the biggest pluses for our town, that the properties are improved, which means the assessments are going to go up, right, which means it's going to generate more local tax revenue, as well as the income that the property does generate for the property owner.
And with taxes, you double dip because of TOT.
That's right. You pick up an additional 10% transient occupancy tax, for the town of Luray. So I think that's a really good thing.
But you got to name a negative now.
Okay. Well, the negative, I have not run into this. We live in an R3 zoning area. We have 2 short-term rentals within eyesight of our home, and the experience we've had has always been positive. We've enjoyed talking to neighbors that are to tenants that are visiting at those properties and that kind of thing. But you certainly do have the opportunity for folks to misbehave, to cause noise, potential for an additional traffic burden. Okay, and I think also with short-term rentals, from a governmental aspect, it probably adds some administrative additional tasks to what our government has to do, which we can talk about the details. But yes, it adds a little bit more to our government folks and what they have to do.
I'm gonna play a little devil's advocate to all y'all's comments here tonight, because as I shift over here to Mr. White on the same question, I'm going to make a note that one of the number one things that I've heard people talk about or complain about is a negative was the very thing Mr. Dudley mentioned, was the potential I stress, for noise, people misbehaving, having maybe too many people having a large gathering when they should, things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, at a recent council meeting, it was reported that there had only been one police call or complaint in, I don't know if it was like the last couple of years or 18 months or since we've had this rise in applications. But I just wanted to make that quick point, and I'm going to let you answer the question of one positive, one negative that short-term rentals, the impacts, say, over the last 2 years in Luray.
Absolutely. And I appreciate your highlighting that, because I think that's really the least concern of mine, is the behavior or crime issue. I think we really haven't seen that play out. My concerns are much more fundamental when it comes to the incentives that I think this creates in our local real estate market, and that is that even though it's a relatively small number, I think when you're creating a de facto situation where almost every unit in Luray can be converted into this luxury use where an owner can make much more money, that is absolutely going to distort the incentives that are at play there. You're going to be more likely to make a short-term rental as opposed to a long-term rental, save yourself the trouble. You're going to be more likely to sell to somebody for that purpose because they'll be willing to pay more. I think even the small number absolutely affects the incentives that are at play. As far as positives, and as far as those incentives, I can get into the mechanisms later, because I've dug into some of the economics of this. On the positive side, this year we were messing with our budget and we were worried about a potentially large meals tax increase. And I said, well, if we're going to have short-term rentals, let's derive the maximum benefit. And I suggested that we double our transient occupancy tax rate. We weren't sure we could do it. I looked into state law. We were able to do it. There was no longer a numerical threshold. So we pretty much doubled that number, and we were able to fill in some budgetary holes with that and ultimately have a smaller, albeit an extant, increase in the meals tax. So that's definitely a positive, is the revenue. On the other hand, that is a really small percentage of the revenue that we bring in. When you look at the TOT tax, that is not one of our big drivers of revenue. That's your real estate and personal property, but it definitely makes a difference.
Right, and with the increase in TOT and the blowback from cabin owners and others, it should probably be noticed or noted that it would be like a local tariff, because it was just passed on to customers, assuredly, and didn't really, I don't think, affected occupancy levels very much.
No, I don't think people, I would be surprised. I know when we travel and use, short-term rentals, I don't think people look at what the tax rate is going to be on that. I think they look at where they want to go and, the kind of short-term rental they want, as opposed to what the tax is going to be on it.
I would agree with that. I think most people generally would, particularly folks who travel a little bit. Now, I do want to set the stage here. The reason I ask you both to state a positive and a negative is because I wanted us to find some common ground, and I wanted to make the point that I believe that, can we agree that short-term rentals are not all good or all bad? That's a general statement we could, and I think most people would agree on that. So let's talk about some numbers. Inside the town of Luray, there are only about 20 short-term rentals operating that are not on Main Street, according to a statement made recently in the last council meeting. And I wanted to dig a little more into numbers. Mr. Dudley, you had some numbers to share with us. In terms of overall units, housing units in the town, we've got, I believe it was 2,800. So we're looking at just under, say, 3,000
Right.
housing, different units of housing in the town. How many are short-term rentals?
Right. Well, and Alex and I are pretty much on the same page. We're not against
Right.
each
Right.
other
No.
as far as this goes.
No.
Because
This
a
is
lot
not
of-
set up as a debate.
Right,
It's a discussion.
right,
It's a
right.
discussion.
Because my friend and our wonderful town manager, Brian Chrisman, I spent some time talking with him. And Randy, we've got between 2,700 and 2,800 housing units. That would include your home, my
Right, sure,
home,
sure.
rental properties, apartments, the whole thing.
Right,
Okay?
right.
Brian liked to break it down into 56 overall lodging businesses. 56 overall lodging businesses.
And you had a breakdown further than
Yes,
that.
we've got 7 hotels.
Okay.
We've got 6 B&Bs, and we've got 43 short-term rentals.
Now, of that 43 short-term rentals, we've certainly had a bevy of one that's have come out of the Luray Landing planned neighborhood development.
Yes,
How many
Brian,
over there?
Brian reported that we have at this time 12.
12.
Okay, 12 short-term rentals out there.
And of course,
Now-
that's been in the last 18 months since they've been building them.
Right,
So-
right. Now, we also need to make sure folks understand that these are active as far as the town of Luray is concerned.
Right.
Now, whether or not there's some folks doing things they shouldn't be doing is another question.
Sure, sure.
Okay? But
Sure.
he did also report that the town periodically goes out on various websites and checks to see what lodging is available in the town of Luray.
Right, right.
And they check to see if they are in compliance.
Right. Well, since you're on, and I'm sorry I forgot to drag the mic over there, but I'm going to go to Mr. White here. Councilman White, we're talking about the planned neighborhood development out at Luray Landing, which is one of the lightning rod points for this issue in the town of Luray. And there was one after another, and I think it became an incentive to some of the new buyers that this was another investment opportunity on top of being somewhere they could stay. So that is something that you've talked about, multifamily areas where you've got duplexes or you've got apartments, R4, R5 type housing, that we should not have this short-term rental wave. Why is that?
Well, first I want to address the point on numbers, and I appreciated Mr. Dudley bringing up the ones that aren't reporting or aren't going through the correct avenues, because I know I've sat down and I've had this discussion with staff. If you were to create the broadest possible filter for a stay in Luray and then zoom in just to the town limits, you could come back with anywhere from 80 to 120 listings, which is well in excess of what is registered with the town correctly.
Right.
There's some duplication there, but the point I think should be taken. As far as what's demoralizing for people, I think most people aren't considering the number of short-term rentals against the larger housing stock. They're considering the number of short-term rentals against the number of available rentals that are actually on the market. And I can say that as somebody who at various times in the last year or so has been looking, when you can't find but one or two places to rent as a family or as a young person,
Right.
but you can see one getting approved almost every council meeting for short term.
Right.
So versus if you have $1,200 to spend to live in a place for a month, or maybe $500 every weekend of that month, you're actually more likely to be able to find a place if you're able to rent out a short term rental and you're looking for that than a person that's looking for a long term rental. I think that's the frustration for people. So I think the effective relevance of those numbers is really, how does the number of short-term rentals compare to the number of available long-term rentals, which is really sparse right now? You have to have a cousin or a friend of a friend who can give you a call and say, I have a unit coming up.
I think that's a great point, because I was going to ask both of you about how you felt at some point, and I'll segue right into that. You set it up for me, teed it up for me, so I'll go into it. You talked about it from the perspective of someone who's been renting, and not only is the supply and demand making it hard to find a place, but where a family maybe could spend $800 and rent a house maybe several years ago, that's maybe $1,500 now.
Yes,
to rent a house. And do you hear about it? I want to hear your thoughts, both in terms of how this has impacted new sales or just sales in general. Not doesn't have to be a new construction, but sales and the long-term rental market.
Well, it's tough to think about the long-term rental market and the impact that short-term rentals have had on that, because a lot of times the folks that there was a house just below where we live. It was a $40,000-$60,000 purchase, and then the owners came in there and spent a bunch of money on it, and it sold for $300,000, and it's now short-term rental. So would they have done that for a long-term rental? Would they have spent a couple $100,000 on it?
Right.
When our long-term rents don't justify the kind of return that they can get on a short-term rental.
Right.
So from an economic standpoint and an investor standpoint, however you want to look at it, I mean, the short-term rental income, has more potential than the long-term rental income for a specific piece of property.
Right.
I must say too that folks that have these short-term rentals, the ones that are being successful, in my opinion, are the ones that are actively managing them. And we've got a lot of folks that may or may not care that much about managing their short-term rentals.
Right.
And they're the ones that you hear that say that they're not having as much success with their short-term rentals, but they're not working it as hard as the ones that are really having success. So that's probably a little different topic that I went off on. I'm sorry, but it does have an impact, I think.
One more question before we take a break. We're going to take a quick break and then go into some other another segment of this conversation. But so the one thing that I've heard people talk about is, even if the town would have approved, in the county or whoever would approve every single short-term rental application that came through, that eventually the market would take care of itself. Now, of course, I don't think it should be a blank check or an open gate where you just approve anything and everything. But at some point, is that true, or how do you feel about that part of it?
So there's a great academic paper on this. It's called The Amenity Trap: Communities That Are Loved to Death. And it was actually written by a group at a university out, I think, in Montana. In Colorado, it was a partnership. So they're thinking about ski communities. But they actually looked at places where this went a little too far and the problems that occurred. And it was really eerie to me reading that, because it was communities that had great outdoor recreation. People wanted to be there. They were relatively affordable rural communities. So they had an explosion in outside interest in terms of retirees and people operating short-term rentals. They didn't arrest it early enough, and now a lot of those communities have become really wildly unaffordable for the people that grew up there and had always lived there. I would actually highlight a point that Mr. Dudley made, which I thought was excellent, which is that when you have the avenue that's open for somebody to have a short-term rental, that is almost always going to be way more profitable than anything else they can do.
Sure.
And I do think that inevitably maybe distorts some of the incentives that are at play. When we talk about that unit that was maybe $100K, it was really run down, it needed a lot of work. When I hear about that unit, I think, gosh, maybe a family that was willing to put in the elbow grease locally could have gotten that, and maybe it's a little bit of a money pit, but made their home. Right. And those options that are in that price range just don't exist anymore. I mean, I know that the data that Mr. Dudley's been really forthcoming with of, your median being well above 300K in Page County, that's pretty remarkable, because what used to be your sort of entry family start out was maybe more, near 200. So that's very disturbing. And I just think as long as we're very carte blanche with these things, I think it's going to change the incentives. I would also name, I had this discussion with Sable Pond, another local real estate agent. If you have a unit that has the great potential to be a short-term rental, even if the buyer is not intending to do that, that potential can be priced into the sale price of that home, anywhere between a 6K to 10K premium, even if the buyer does not intend that purpose. In the same way that if you have a piece of prime agricultural land, it's rezoned commercial, it can sell for so much more because of that potential use,
Comparable sales.
even if the buyer doesn't intend to pursue that use.
Yeah.
So I think if you multiply that premium by so many units in Luray, I think you can see where incentives start to shift. And the third point, which goes back to that amenity trap article, I think this sort of gold rush feeds the perception of Luray as this great, investment and retirement community, which I think can be great if you're in that market and you're in, that's the kind of thing that's your livelihood. But it creates an attention to our market. I was looking at one of the MLS systems, and it was breaking it down to the metros outside of Virginia that have had the most interest in Page County's real estate market. And I was kind of amazed because it was like DC and Manhattan. So people that realize their money goes a lot farther here, having a lot more interest in our market, either to retire or invest. And that means that the local family that maybe scrounges together the cash and the down payment, there's going to be a phone call right after that person leaves the office from somebody out of town who says, I can do this today, and I can do it for this much more. So I think the incentives in our market have really shifted a lot, and there are obviously benefits that come with short-term rentals, but I try to be a tribune of the concern that people have shared with me, and it's really overwhelming. I'll end with this. I spoke with high school seniors the other day. I give a tour every semester of Town Hall, and the high school seniors are asking me about short-term rentals. I mean, they're very concerned, and that is the depth of the concern.
It's a wide-reaching issue.
I mean, there's probably a good percentage of people that aren't engaged and don't have an opinion.
Right.
But I think of the people that have an opinion, and maybe they need to know more, I don't know. But I think the ones that have an opinion, it's overwhelmingly a critical one. And I think we've got to address that in local government.
Well, I think a lot of that criticism comes from driving up prices, whether it be supply and demand or whether it be a tad of gentrification with outside investors coming in bringing money. Well, it's like your beloved Hokies in the city of Blacksburg. They worry about with 50,000 60,000 people filling that stadium on home weekends. They worried about investors coming downtown and buying up properties to create B&B or Airbnbs or short-term rentals. And because of that, the city of Blacksburg will only allow 6. If you do an Airbnb, you can only do 6 weekends a year, and that's one way of regulating it. But circling back to the question, how do you think it will affect Luray in terms of that the philosophy that the market will take care of itself? If the government just approves them all, the market will take care of itself.
Well, I think the market certainly is the dynamic force that's going to determine the success or failure of short-term rentals without any question. Okay, the market's going to determine that, but with 2,700 to 2,800 family units here, council is they're doing a great job by looking at this stage and trying to plan for this. But I don't think we're in a crisis mode quite yet as far as short-term rentals are concerned. When we're looking at 49 out of 2,700. But I think council is wise to start taking a look at it.
Okay. Well, let's take a little break at this point here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about kind of what's coming up next. The fact that the Luray Town Council has put a 90-day hold on any new permit applications for short-term rentals or to operate a lodging house, and we're going to talk a little bit about that 90 days and what they hope to accomplish when we come back. Right after we hear another word from our sponsor. At Luray Caverns, the Smithsonian Institution said, quote, "It is safe to say there is probably no other cave in the world more completely and profusely decorated than that of Luray. Come see Mother Nature showing off, only at Luray Caverns. Visit them online at luraycaverns.com to plan your trip today." And welcome back, everybody. We're back here at Bill Dudley and Associates Real Estate in Luray, talking with Bill Dudley and Alex White, right back up where we left off. And we talked about the issue coming up of the Luray Council putting a 90-day hold at their recent December 9th meeting They voted unanimously to do this, to put a hold on any new applications for lodging house permits as special use permits. And they're doing that in very general terms to kind of review the process, review the guidelines, review the zoning ordinances, and see what they may tinker with. And we're going to talk to Councilman White in just a moment about that process, as well as what he thinks may come out of those discussions. But I'm going to start with Mr. Dudley to ask what, from an industry standpoint, what would you like to see come out of this process?
Well, Randy, since you mentioned it, I can remember when a house in Luray sold for $100,000. So
Right.
that's
Right.
been a long time ago. But we did go to council many years ago, and for example, Court Street. Court Street was designated as an area where people could do short-term rentals by doing the proper procedure with the town of Luray, and we have a couple of other areas over in the town that qualifies for. Personally, I don't think we should have short-term rentals in R1 or R2 zoning areas. Those are our highest zoning residential areas, okay? So R1, R2, I think...
And those are mostly single-family dwellings.
Single-family dwellings, that's exactly right. I happen to live in an R3 zone, and that would require a special use permit. I think, Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong, business is by right. That's 200 feet off of Main Street. And I think in an M1 zone, we don't have much of that. You could do that by special use permit. So, if we pay attention to the zones that we have, that kind of sets the guideline for what people can do, where they can do it. So I think that's pretty important.
Okay. Very well. So, as I said, Councilman White, this process, and you guys as a group had talked about doing this before the recent meeting. It was no surprise that you were going to kind of put this hold on things, because I think you even tried to do it back in November, or we're going to. Excuse me. So tell folks out there, what is the purpose of this in very general terms, what will be the process, and what you hope comes of it.
Yeah, I think the concept was to take the time to figure out the issue. For me, I maybe came at it from a different place, which was at probably my first or second meeting on council. I came in talking about short-term rentals and talking about the different zones and where it made sense, just because it was something that I heard overwhelmingly from people knocking doors and going to events. So I thought maybe the time to stop and figure the issue out was a lot earlier, because that was like 2 years ago, but I think some others on the council have taken more interest in the issue recently after going through a re-election, and I think that's where this discourse about a little pause came from. I can say that there are some actions we've already taken that I've been pleased with, because we did remove short-term rentals in R4, which is the boom field, R5, which is our high-density residential, where you would have apartment buildings. And we said that we wouldn't want to have short-term rentals in multifamily units, just having somebody in an apartment beside you. I thought those were positive steps. I thought doubling the TOT tax rate was a positive step. Me personally, I think keeping things a little closer to that Main Street corridor makes the most sense, because that's where you'd probably want to stay anyway. I don't know that I would want to stay in a family neighborhood down the street from the school. I think I would want to stay sort of in the thick of downtown activities.
And it helps your downtown businesses with foot traffic.
Yeah, so that's a direction I'd like to see, but council's going to think about it. This process goes to the planning commission. Basically, the council generates ideas. The planning commission will consider the merit of those ideas, come up with some of their own, and then kick something back to the council to make a final determination.
What's the number one thing that you hope comes out of it?
For me, just because I think in such a tight market, even a small number of these units makes a difference. For me, just any further, the more deliberate we are with these things, the better. So I would love to see, maybe a discourse about removing them in another district, or maybe subsetting our districts to say, okay, Main Street, downtown, that's where we want to have these things, not anywhere else. Anything like that, I would be pleased with. We've also had discussions about ownership, which is a little dicey with zoning, but it's always a weird feeling for me when I open up the packet and the people aren't from here. It's some LLC from Northern Virginia because they figured this is an investment. They'll hire a local person to be on site, but that usually doesn't work out the way they say.
Right.
I like local business owners. I like the old model of, the nice lady that has some room and would like to do a B&B. That's really not what we're seeing.
Right.
So any ways that we can be a little more deliberate about what's approved and what's allowed, I'd be pleased with.
I'm going to keep it here with you just for a second. One of the other issues that you've raised with it is not allowing it in new construction. What's your reasoning there?
Yeah, I think if you're going to produce more units at a time that we need more supply, I think the national deficit is like 1 million units plus. That's the shortage we have as a country to house people. So I don't know why you want to build new units and then not put families in.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, I'm very excited to see the units that are going to hopefully go in the old art warehouse building. I love how the developer made this statement at a Luray Council meeting that said, we could kind of fancy these up a little bit and get a whole lot more money for them, but we want to keep them in that range where the teacher, the police officer, the firefighter, whoever can afford it. And I thought that was outstanding of them. And
you've got the 50 plus units out next to the airport.
Yes.
Those are very, very nice rental units out there.
And those filled up quickly, and they have got a waiting list. You're talking about the affordable housing units. They've got a waiting list for those. So that took no time. Yeah. Last question, fellas. We're going to wind up by, and there's no perfect answer here. There's no exact answer, but what is the right balance between these positive and negative benefits of short-term rentals? What does it look like? Is there a magic number? Is there a magic percentage of the inventory? Is it just kind of, watching your step by step as you go along with growth? And I'm going to start with Mr. Dudley and end up with Councilman White.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, Randy. But I will tell you that we're a agritourism area, and we need to accept the fact we've got Shenandoah National Park, Luray Caverns, the South Fork of the Shenandoah, and our economy is based on tourism and agriculture, and we're blessed to have that. And with short-term rentals, if you don't like red, we got green. Okay? So that gives travelers so many more options, and there are lots of folks that just like to be in a short-term rental as opposed to being in a hotel or motel. So I think we've got to look to the market to see what the market does with this. Again, as I said, I think Alex and council are on this. They're aware of this. It may have a couple of problems now, but no major issues at this stage of the game. So I think they're very wise, to take a look at it. If I could make one last point.
Yes, I'm sorry, because I want to offer y'all the opportunity if there was anything we left out.
Right.
That you could bring it up now and go right ahead.
Just a quickie to make sure folks understand. We talk about short-term rentals, and we talk about Airbnb, vacation rental by owner, Booking.com, Homes to Go. Those are all internet platforms. Those are just places where people can go on the internet to find a rental. They have nothing to do with the compliance of the owner as far as zoning, having a business license or a special use permit or whatever. So that's a big thing with short-term rentals. You've got to understand those platforms are there, to accommodate people to come and rent a property, but they have nothing to do with compliance, and it's up to the owner to make sure that they're compliant.
Right, and like Councilman White was saying earlier, there's some of them who aren't reporting. They aren't paying their TOT tax.
That's exactly right.
And I know the town and county both have been concerned with trying to make sure they collect 100% of what they should be getting.
Yes, and again, in talking to Brian, that's one of the negatives, the administrative things it puts on our town government, but they are checking, and they'll send people a letter. And there's a process that they can go through if they are not compliant. So it's being looked at.
Yeah, I tip my cap to Daniel Babb and the others that are
Yes,
that
we're
are
looking
really,
at it.
and Commissioner of Revenue,
Right.
Becky Smith, is also very concerned about this and trying to make sure that local coffers get every penny that they're supposed to have, just like you mentioned earlier. So I'm going to let you have the last word here, Councilman White, and I'll just kind of repeat here, the question that, what is the right balance between these positive and negative benefits of short-term rentals? What should it look like? Is there a magic number, silver bullet, or is there a percentage of the overall industry the overall market inventory that we don't want to give up? What are some of your thoughts and where you hope this is headed and what we accomplish?
Yeah, I'm glad about the progress we've made in terms of removing some of the zoning districts, saying you can't have them in multifamily units, because those are intended to be the sort of affordable family housing. For me, I actually think that this use does not map very well onto our zoning districts the way they're drawn. I think a much more deliberate approach would be to say, what parts of town do short-term rentals make sense in? And then writing over our zoning districts to just allow them there. I discussed with Brian, there was some other use in the past that we did that for, where we had rules for the overall district, but then there were specific rules for specific streets. And for me, I think short-term rentals, something like this, makes sense closer to our commercial core. That's the reason that they're by right in B1 now, and they make less sense in our neighborhoods. So that would be the direction I'd like to go in, because when you're in neighborhoods, you get frustrated people, like the discourse on Mechanic Street right now, where you have a lot of people that'll have one on each side or one on two sides of them, and you're going to have a situation where you could hit a golf ball from one to the other and pass like 5 short-term rentals. So I think when we get into neighborhoods, we get down a slippery slope. Yeah. So I'd like us to actually zoom out, say, where do they make sense on the street level, and approach it in that way. And for me, that's commercial, that's Main Street. That's where you'd want to stay. I don't know that I would want to stay, I don't know. Do you want to stay on 8th Avenue if you're coming here on vacation? I think you want to actually stay close to where you can walk to the coffee shop or to the restaurant. That would be my approach.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I tell you, it's not something that everyone is going to be pleased with no matter what is done. There's going to be a few disgruntled folks. Because it's such a unique situation sometimes to each individual property and to each individual owner. But I hope that over the course of this half hour or so that we've at least given you out there, the viewer, a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more data, a little bit more insight into this issue that everyone's talking about, from high school students to investors in real estate, to just a young couple out there looking for a place to rent. So once again, Bill Dudley, Alex White, thank you gentlemen both for your time today, and I appreciate you coming and giving your opinions. And in addition to your time today, I want to thank both of you gentlemen for everything you've done in our community as well, which is quite a long list. We also want to say thank you to Eleanor Arrington out there, and for her work behind the camera and for her editing skills this week. And remember, if you like today's video, hit that like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel on YouTube at Page Valley News. And make sure you share the video with a friend as well. And as always, make sure you help out all of our furry friends down at the Page County Animal Shelter and help them find a forever home. Until next week, I'm Randy Arrington saying, enjoy that Page Valley living.